So we are now ready to put all the elements together to come to the concept of Keynesian equilibrium. So the key to understanding Keynesian equilibrium is to remember that equilibrium is a situation where people's plans and decisions have been met and there is no further tendency for change in the system. That's the formal definition of equilibrium. That is, people's plans have been met and they have no incentive or reason to change their decisions. Or alternately, even though people's decisions have not been met, there is no mechanism by which they can foster a change in the system. So it's essentially the idea is you've hit a point where there is no more tendency to change. Right? And in economics, this means that it's usually when people's decisions are met, because if you got a decision, you weren't able to meet it, the assumption is that there will be a change. You will do something in order to create a situation which you prefer. So let's take a look at what happens inside the economy. The key to understanding this is that output is what I'm going to call Y, all right? This output is going to become your income, and then some of this income will get consumed, to which I will add firms' planned investment. Right? And as long as my investment plans and my consumption plans added together, which is my aggregate expenditure, equals the amount that I produced, it means I produced certain amount. Everybody was able to meet their plans. We sold that amount. That's equilibrium. Let's see what happens when we are not in a situation where we are in equilibrium. What's going to happen next? So to do that, I'm first going to run this through with the circular flow, which I'm going to draw in a slightly different way than you're used to make it easier to see what's going on. Then I'm going to define equilibrium, and then I'm going to show you how to derive it and graph it. All right? So those are our steps. So now that we've got our households and firms, we're going to put them together, right? And just take a look at what this equilibrium looks like. And we're going to use some numbers to be able to follow it along more easily using the circular flow. So let's just say that consumption in this case was 1,000 plus 0.7y. And investment, let's say coming based on the interest rate in the money markets, that the level of investment was about 2,000. All right. Now, let's just see what's going to happen in this economy. And let's say that I'm beginning with a production level of 20,000. Right. So if I have a production level of about 20,000, well, that becomes about 20,000 of income by definition to people, and it goes to households. And how much the household consume? Well, I can figure that out by using that consumption function. So with an income level of 20,000, that would be consumption is equal to 15,000. So out of my 20,000 production, 15,000 got consumed, which means that about 5,000 got saved by definition, right? 20,000 produced, 15,000 consumed, which means 5,000 got saved. Because the savings is viewed as leaving the flow, I'm going to call this leakages, right? Continuing on to the planned consumption of 15,000 that the households consume, I'm going to add a planned expenditure by firms of 2,000. because I view this as entering the flow, at least visually. I'll sometimes end up calling this injections. And so think of it like a pipe with the savings leaving and the investment coming, the planned investment coming. And so when I add the two together, my aggregate expenditures in this case is 15, 16, 17. And take a look at what happened. I produced 20,000 of Y or income. I was able to sell 17,000 of planned aggregate expenditures. That difference means that I produced 20,000, I was able to sell 17,000, and then what that means is over here, unplanned inventory, unsold output would be equal to 3,000. That is what happened is I produced 20,000, I was able to sell 17,000, 3,000 was left unsold. It just added to my inventory unsold. So since I wasn't able to sell the stuff, I wasn't able to meet my investment plans. My plan was 2,000. I ended up with 5,000 or 3,000. Right? What am I going to do next year? Am I going to continue to produce 20,000 when I couldn't sell the stuff? The answer is no. And so what Keynes said is what happens is when you weren't able to sell the stuff, you would cut back on your production. And in this case, let's keep it simple. You figured, okay, last year I was able to sell 17,000. So next year I'm not going to produce 20,000. Let me sell 17,000. Let me produce 17,000. Right? So what you'll do is you'll cut back and you'll produce 17,000. But that means your income will go down. When your income goes down, your consumption will go down. So your income went down by 3,000, right? Your consumption will go down, but it won't go down by 3,000 because the MPC is between 0 and 1. So the chances are that, when you get a cutback, so if my income goes down by 500, I'll cut back on my consumption, usually not by 500. I'll cut back, say, 300, and then I'll save a little less. So some of the cut will go into savings, some of it will go, I'll save a little less, I'll consume a little less, and so on. And so I'll consume less. And because C is going down, even though ceteris paribus, I haven't had any change in interest rates so far, there hasn't been a change in planned investment, because of the decline in consumption, aggregate expenditure will go down. And this will keep happening until I reach the point where aggregate expenditure, planned aggregate expenditure, what people want to buy, exactly equals income output levels, right? So I'm now going to give you a sort of understanding of what this means in terms of how it will actually work out in practice. And then you can see how it works. And then we'll figure out what this equilibrium looks like. Pretty much here's what's happening, right? Here I am. I thought that I would be able to sell 20,000 of output, and Christmas came, but because of COVID and because people not flying around, I wasn't able to sell the stuff. So here's what I do. I say, I can't afford to produce that much. I've got unsold goods. So what I will do as a garment manufacturer who works in New York City, say, I'm going to or a retailer, I'm going to cut back, I'm going to close some stores, right? And that's what I do. So the QFC down the street from me just got closed. So yeah, shut that down. I shut that down, which meant the people working in the QFC didn't get an income. They didn't get an income, so they had to cut back on their consumption, which meant they did not go ahead and buy the pizza that they normally do every Friday night. The pizza guy finds that he cannot sell as much pizza, so he decides that he is not going to take his children to the park and buy ice cream from Sophie the way he usually does. Sophie cuts back on her ice cream production, fires some workers who decide that they're not going to be able to take their annual vacation this year the way they usually do. The guy who runs the travel, do you see? So what you're seeing, and this is what Keynes is pointing out, that the Circular flow shows you that there is a chain reaction. My spending is your income. If I don't spend, you don't have an income. And that, he said, causes a recession. That takes one person's income loss and makes it the second person's income loss. The second person's income loss will become the third person's income loss. All right? And that's why recessions and depressions become really interesting, because they're pointing out the interconnectedness of my spending and your income. This has a further implication, which is what Keynes called the paradox of thrift. We always tell people, the underlying problem is you are not saving. And this is true when you've got a booming economy and when you've got long-term growth prospects and so on, right? We definitely don't want everybody to consume like mad and not worry about tomorrow. But if everybody saves, nobody buys. And if nobody buys, you can't sell stuff. And if you can't sell stuff, you got a recession. And so this was what Keynes called the paradox of thrift. You keep thinking that the best way to handle difficult times is to save for the future. That might be true in certain circumstances in normal times, and that's a good way to think about it from an individual perspective. But from the perspective of a macroeconomy as a whole, that's not really a good thing. So even though we often get nervous about people consuming, and when we introduce the government, you're going to see this about too much government spending and so on, what we're going to start realizing is that that spending is going to turn out to be quite crucial for handling recessions. Right? So that's the first insight we're going to have. Now that we see how this works, let's see if we can calculate the equilibrium level of production in this economy. That's going to tell us what the sort of end point or what the sort of tendency is going to be for where real GDP will end up as this process works itself out.